Good afternoon and welcome to Opinion Journal. I'm Mary Kissel. The FBI is continuing to piece together clues in Monday's Boston Marathon bombings. Investigators believe the explosive device was hidden in a pressure cooker, which was hidden inside a black bag. The explosions killed 3, injured more than 175 people. But the evidence hasn't led the FBI to a suspect yet. Foundation for Defense of Democracy's fellow Tom Joslin is here to give us some insights into the kind of bomb that was used, who's used it in the past, and why it's so easy to learn how to make a bomb. Tom, first let's get the big question out of the way. There's still no evidence or clues as to who did this or why.
Not a shred of evidence about the suspects and responsible for this. That's really what's, I think, frustrating most people this far out. But, these things take time. It could take, even more days to figure out who was responsible.
Well, it took years in terms of the Atlanta bombing. But we have seen these kinds of IEDs before abroad. Where?
We've seen them. It's a very common IED, and that's the right term to use, an improvised explosive device. We've seen this type of IED used in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, elsewhere, really any of the battlefields in the post-9/11 world. It's been used hundreds upon hundreds of times.
But it's also not been used here, but there was a threat of its use here. Where? It
was a third of the components used in the Times Square bombing attempt in May 2010, which was plotted by the Pakistani Taliban. It was basically loaded with about 120 firecrackers and was set off as part of this chain explosion that basically didn't take off.
Okay. And why are these bombs so destructive?
They're destructive because they're basically packed with a bunch of shrapnel, nails, ball bearings, those types of things. And really the destructive impact is the fact that it sends all of this debris out at a very high velocity and basically takes out everything in its path. And that's really what it's meant to do, is create mayhem sort of in all these different directions.
And Tom, is it easy to learn how to make these bombs? Is that information widely available?
It is. I mean, what we've seen is in the jihadist world, really, Al-Qaeda and Arabian Peninsula has been trying to get people to use these bombs in sort of lone wolf attacks. That doesn't mean that this is who is responsible for this bomb, because once it gets out there, once the knowledge of how to make these bombs gets out there, anybody can pick that up and do it themselves. But yeah, it's very easy to make. And the big thing here is that it prevents the FBI from really having advance notice that this type of bomb is in play.
Why?
The FBI has, I think, very smartly put in place all these tripwires. So if you go to buy a certain type of explosive, you go to buy a certain type of chemical, it basically sets off this chain of events where they can be reporting to law enforcement so they can isolate in on a potential bomb threat. This type of bomb doesn't set off any of those tripwires. So it allows somebody to basically construct this bomb in secret until they detonate it.
But I understand that you can't track purchases of nails, but aren't other components of these bombs trackable, such as, for example, BB pellets in the thousands and things like that?
Well, after the fact they are. But if you were going to set off a tripwire every time some 8-year-old went to get the load his BB gun, then you'd have a lot of problems in the U.S. But, after the fact, you can basically use the forensic evidence to try and track down the pressure cooker serial ID number, the types of nails potentially, types of BBs, that type of thing. You may be able to piece that together after the fact. But beforehand, you can't really set off a tripwire with that.
Now, the news that a pressure cooker was used broke just in these last few hours. Is it unusual that the FBI has been able to identify the type of bomb and the components in it so quickly, only 48 hours after the original attacks?
No, I'd say there really is no usual with any kind of attack, really. I mean, it really is a wide spectrum of things that can happen. What I would say is unusual in this case is that basically we know the types of bombs that were used, but we don't have a shred of evidence of who actually planted them. And there's sort of this desperation, I think, about that. Now, when I say unusual, in this sense, you think about where these bombs were placed in this packed square with all this video surveillance, all this electronic media, cameras, all sorts of eyewitnesses, and really, as far as we know, right now, there's not a shred of evidence of who did this.
And no one is claiming responsibility. We've got less than 30 seconds left, Tom. Senator Roger Wicker, President Obama were sent letters today and yesterday that tested positive for ricin. What do you make of that?
Well, those are the early reports that they tested positive for ricin. I haven't seen the lab results yet. I mean, basically, the initial screening can have a false positive, so I haven't seen what the actual lab results say yet. But ricin, again, is another common sort of biotoxin that somebody can make at home, and that others have advocated to make at home and use. And it's clumsy, but it can be lethal.
So a common toxin that can be made at home, bombs that we know how to make that are difficult to track. Foundation for Defense of Democracy's fellow Tom Joslin, thank you so much for that report.
Thanks, Mary.